Cleveland, Ohio was always noisy in the evenings, cars rushing through downtown, people chatting in small cafes, children playing in the narrow alleys between aging brick houses. But inside a modest three-story home on the city's east side, the noise of the world outside never truly entered. The home belonged to Daniel Parker, a hard-working plumber in his mid-40s, his wife Marlene, and their son Jordan, who was only 22 but already a father himself. For years, this house had been a warm shelter for 3 generations, filled with meals cooked in a cramped kitchen and the soft chatter of family life. Daniel was a tall, broad-shouldered man with tanned skin from working long hours outdoors. He rarely complained and never allowed his family to go without. Although he didn't express emotions easily, his love showed in small gestures. Fixing a broken chair before anyone noticed, patching the roof himself to avoid repair costs, always leaving a portion of food for his wife after late shifts. His wife, Marlene, was his opposite. Gentle-voiced, patient, and endlessly selfless, she worked at a local sewing factory. She managed household chores even after exhausting shifts, folding laundry late at night, preparing meals before sunrise, and keeping the small house spotless despite their busy lives. She was the type of mother who remembered every birthday, every doctor's appointment, every forgotten detail her family took for granted. Jordan, their only son, grew up in that loving environment. When he was small, he was curious and quick-witted, often running to the front yard to greet his father returning from work. But as he reached high school, something in him shifted. The world outside their home seemed more attractive: friends who partied, nights out, the thrill of belonging to a group that didn't care about rules or consequences. Marlene always defended him. "He's young," she told Daniel. "He needs freedom to experience life." Daniel disagreed, insisting discipline mattered. Their differing views slowly created cracks in the way Jordan was raised, and Jordan, sensing it, pushed boundaries further each year. At 20, Jordan shocked everyone by marrying Emily, a kind and hard-working girl from a nearby neighborhood. They soon welcomed a baby daughter, little Haley, with soft curls and bright eyes that made everyone in the Parker household melt. Daniel hoped fatherhood would mature his son, make him more responsible.
Marlene prät vor Sesame.
But reality was not as kind.
Jordan fell deeper into nightlife.
Bars, clubs, late-night gatherings with reckless friends each week blended into the next. He missed dinners, ignored Emily's pleas, returned home smelling of alcohol and smoke. Sometimes he didn't return at all. Emily held on for the sake of their daughter, believing Jordan still had good inside him. She stayed silent to avoid upsetting her in-laws, especially Marlene, who cared for her like a daughter.
Daniel SAW evating.
His jaw tightened each time Jordan stumbled into the house late at night, too intoxicated to stand straight. Arguments erupted more often, Daniel's voice stern and disappointed, Jordan's tone defensive and careless. Marlene would step between them, trembling but determined to soothe tensions. She never imagined her son, the boy she once held in her arms, would grow into a man spiraling downward. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel had left the city for a 2-day contracting job in Columbus. Emily took Haley to visit her parents for the weekend, hoping distance would ease her stress. In the large but suddenly hollow house, only Marlene and Jordan remained.
Rein kluts gatert ab over Cleveland, casting a grey shadow over the quiet neighborhood.
The air was heavy, humid, and strangely silent. Jordan lay in his room upstairs, exhausted after days of non-stop partying. His body trembled slightly, withdrawal, stress, and sleeplessness blurring his senses. Though drained, the cravings inside him wouldn't stop. His mind felt like a storm, voices whispering, pushing, urging him toward escape. With shaky hands, he reached into his drawer and pulled out a small packet, the kind he promised Emily he had quit long ago. He hesitated, breathing heavily. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was dangerous. But the world around him felt unbearable, and in his clouded mind, the substance felt like the only thing that could silence his thoughts. He inhaled. Within seconds, the room distorted. Walls rippled, the ceiling stretched into strange shapes, and colors twisted unnaturally. Jordan slumped against the wall, eyes half open, slipping into a distorted version of reality where nothing felt real. Downstairs, Marlene was cooking dinner as if it were just another ordinary evening. Habit guided her every movement, washing vegetables, stirring broth, folding a dish towel neatly on the counter. Her heart felt heavy thinking of Jordan, but routine kept her mind steady at least for a moment.
But upstairs, Jordans Halluzinationsgrästronger.
Heat surged through his body. Sounds echoed.
Shadows moved strangely.
Something primal, confused, and dangerous awakened within him. In that warped mental state, he stumbled out of his room and down the stairs, drawn by noise, scent, or simply the presence of another human being. When he reached the kitchen doorway, the fluorescent light flickered above him. His breath grew uneven. His mind was no longer his own. He saw not his mother but a distorted, unfamiliar figure shaped by delusions and fragmented memories.
Marlene Sensazione behind her.
She turned. And in that instant, she froze. Jordan's eyes, once warm and lively, were blank and wild, filled with confusion and intensity she had never seen. His posture, his expression, the way his hands trembled, it wasn't her son standing there. It was someone else entirely.
Jordan, sweetie?
Are you okay? She whispered, voice shaking. No answer.
Just heavy breathing.
A sinking dread spread through her body as she realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. She stepped back, instinctively clutching the edge of the counter.
Jordan, talk to me.
Please. But the storm inside his mind had already taken control. What happened next would scar both of them for life, reshaping the Parker family forever. And once the rain began falling against the windows, Cleveland's familiar noise faded completely, leaving only the sound of a tragedy unfolding where love once lived. The morning after the storm was unnaturally quiet. Cleveland's usual Saturday bustle hadn't yet reached the neighborhood, and the Parker house felt disconnected from the rest of the world, as if it were floating somewhere isolated, untouched by human warmth. Sunlight filtered weakly through the kitchen blinds, casting pale stripes across the floor where Marlene sat curled in the corner, back pressed against the cabinet. Her hair, usually tied neatly after morning showers, hung loosely around her face. Her eyes were hollow, red-rimmed, and unfocused, staring into nothingness. The clock ticked loudly. Every sound felt amplified in the heavy silence. Upstairs, Jordan sat on his bedroom floor with his back against the bed frame, breathing deeply but shakily. His mind, partially recovered from the previous night's hallucinations, was now fully awake to reality. And that reality was unbearable. Every time he blinked, flashes of the night before surged through his memory like sharp blades. His hands were cold, trembling uncontrollably. He whispered to himself, voice barely audible. What did I do? What did I do to her? His chest tightened. A sickening wave of guilt washed over him so violently he thought he might vomit. He pressed his palms against his temples, gripping his hair, wishing desperately that he could erase everything, wipe out every second of the night that had destroyed the person he loved most. Downstairs, Marlene shifted slightly, feeling pain spread through her limbs as if she were made of fragile glass. She hugged her knees tighter. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the distorted look on Jordan's face from the night before, a face she recognized but did not recognize, the face of her son trapped inside some monstrous fog. She opened her mouth to breathe, but her chest hurt with every inhale. How could something like that happen inside her own home? Inside the kitchen, she lovingly prepared meals for Jordan since he was a toddler. Inside the house she spent decades building into a sanctuary for her family? The world no longer made sense. Her hands trembled as she lifted them to her face, covering her eyes. Tears began to fall again, not loudly, not desperately, just quietly, endlessly, like a faucet that refused to shut off. Around noon, the front door opened. Daniel, exhausted from his work trip, stepped inside dragging a heavy duffel bag. He kicked off his boots and muttered something under his breath about traffic on the highway, expecting Marlene to greet him like she always did, warm smile, soft voice, offering to reheat leftover food. But the house greeted him with silence.
No scent of breakfast. No sound of the TV. No rustle of Marlene's slippers.
He frowned. "Ma," he called out. "You home?" No answer. He walked toward the kitchen and froze. Marlene was sitting on the floor, still as a statue, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her body together. Her expression wasn't one he had ever seen in their 20 years of marriage. Daniel's heart lurched. "Marlene." He rushed to her side and knelt down. "What happened? Are you hurt?" But the moment he touched her shoulder, she recoiled violently, jerking away from him as if his hand were fire. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. His wife had never reacted to him that way. Ever.
"Marlene, honey, what's wrong?"
His voice trembled. He reached toward her again, slower this time. But she kept her gaze on the floor, unable to meet his eyes. Her lips quivered, but she said nothing. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't stress. This was fear.
Deep, soul-shaking fear.
Daniel looked around the kitchen, trying to piece together clues. Broken plates? Signs of intruders?
Blood?
Anything? Nothing.
Just a quiet house and a broken wife.
His confusion grew into dread. "What happened while I was gone?" he whispered. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, slow, hesitant, almost dragging. Jordan appeared at the edge of the hallway, hair messy, face pale, eyes sunken with sleepless terror. He looked like someone who had crawled back from the edge of something dark and unforgiving. Daniel stared at him.
"Jordan. What's going on here?"
But Jordan didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there, shoulders trembling, breathing unevenly as if one wrong word would shatter him completely. Daniel looked from Jordan to Marlene, then back again. Something terrible had happened. Something so big, so destructive, that neither of them could speak. He stepped toward Jordan.
"Son talk to me.
Did you two fight?"
Did so meeting happen last night?" "Still silence."
Jordan lowered his gaze to the floor, tears gathering in his eyes. Marlene squeezed her arms around herself even tighter, shrinking into the corner as though trying to disappear. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. His instincts screamed that whatever occurred was not something ordinary. Not even close. He raised his voice.
"Jordan, answer me."
Jordan flinched just a tiny movement, but enough for Daniel to notice. Daniel softened his tone, taking a step back. "Are you hurt?"
"Is your motor hurt?"
Jordan shut his eyes as if even hearing the words physically hurt him.
Daniel inhaled sharply.
Something inside him cracked open, a terrifying possibility forming in his mind, one he couldn't dare say out loud. But he wasn't ready for the truth. Not yet. For the next several hours, the Parker home became a suffocating cage of silence. Daniel paced the living room, watching his wife with fear and his son with suspicion, waiting for Simeonianito to explain. Jordan retreated to his room, unable to breathe in the same space as his mother. Every time he heard her footsteps, his chest tightened painfully. He wanted to apologize, fall at her feet, beg for forgiveness, but he had no right to even speak to her. Marlene stayed in the kitchen corner until the afternoon sun faded, too paralyzed to move. She didn't know how to exist in the same house with Jordan, but she also couldn't bear the thought of telling Daniel. The truth would destroy him, destroy all three of them, and she was barely holding herself together as it was. Each passing minute stretched into an hour. Each breath felt like lifting a mountain. Daniel eventually tried again. He sat beside Marlene, voice gentle, desperate.
Marlene, please. I'm your husband. Tell me what's wrong.
Only tears answered him. And when he reached for her hand, she hid it under her knees. It broke him more than she knew. By evening, Daniel stood up abruptly. I'm calling Emily, he said.
I'm bringing Haley home.
Maybe she can. Marlene suddenly shook her head violently, speaking for the first time all day.
No. Don't bring them here. Her voice cracked.
Daniel froze. Why? He whispered.
WHY can't take come home. Marlene shook her eyes tightly, tears spilling down.
Because this house no longer feels safe. Because the walls still echo with what happened. Because she cannot bear anyone else being close, not even her own granddaughter. But she couldn't say that. She whispered instead. I just don't want them here right now. Daniel had never felt more helpless. He turned toward the stairs, staring at Jordan's closed door. His expression darkened not with anger, but with a fear he didn't know he was capable of feeling. Something told him Jordan was at the center of all this. And the dread of confirming that truth made his skin crawl. Night fell. Rain returned, tapping softly against the windows almost identical to the storm the night before. But tonight, the sound carried sorrow rather than rage.
Jordan lay awake, eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling.
Marlene sat on the edge of her bed, trembling as she held the blanket to her chest. Daniel remained at the dining table, staring at the front door, wondering how his family had collapsed overnight. None of them spoke. The Parker house, once filled with warmth and weekend meals, had transformed into a place of ghosts haunted by trauma, guilt, and secrets too heavy to voice. And though they did not know it yet, this was only the beginning of their nightmare. The days that followed were suffocating.
The Parker home, also filled with the routine sounds of morning coffee, Marlene folding laundry, and Daniel fixing the meeting in the garage, now felt like a place frozen in time.
Its walls held secrets, and its inhabitants were sinking beneath the weight of them. Marlene barely spoke. Jordan barely moved.
Daniel barely slept.
All three lived in the same house, yet each existed in a separate universe of pain. Marlene tried to return to normalcy, at least on the surface. She still woke at dawn, as she had done for decades, and still stepped into the kitchen to make breakfast. But her hands would shake so much that she often dropped utensils, a spoon clattering onto the floor, a cup slipping from her grip. Every noise startled her. Every shadow made her flinch. She moved through the house like someone walking in a minefield, terrified of triggering a memory that might break her all over again. And then came the physical changes. It started gently: nausea in the mornings before she even touched food. At first, she blamed stress. She hadn't eaten properly for days. Anyone would feel sick under that kind of emotional weight. But then the nausea returned again the next day. And the next. And the next. Soon it became a daily routine, one she feared more than anything. Her breathing grew unsteady each time she felt her stomach twist. She tried to dismiss the thought forming in her mind. She tried to blame exhaustion, shock, anxiety. But deep down, a dread was growing. One morning, while rinsing her face in the bathroom sink, she looked at her reflection. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were sunken. Her lips trembled.
But beneath all that,
her body felt different. Not wrong. Just different. Her hands clutched the edge of the sink. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She wanted to scream, but her voice refused to come out.
No, no, please no.
She whispered it like a prayer to a God that she wasn't sure was listening.
Upstairs, Jordan was living a different horror.
He barely left his room. The sunlight stabbed his eyes. The sound of the floor creaking beneath his mother's footsteps made his heart skip in panic. Every time he heard her voice, even a whisper, his whole body locked up. He replayed the night 1,000 times in his mind.
1000 nightmares. 1000 versions of regret.
He would lie on the floor for hours, staring at the ceiling fan, watching it spin slowly, imagining time moving without him. He felt as if he had been exiled from the world, punished, cursed, stripped of any identity he once had. He didn't dare go near his mother. He didn't dare speak to his father. He didn't dare look at himself in the mirror. The mirror was the worst. Because in it, he didn't see Jordan Parker anymore. He saw someone monstrous, someone foreign, a shadow of himself he didn't recognize. His eyes, once full of life, now carried guilt so deep it looked like darkness sinking into his skin. Sometimes he pressed his palms against his ears to drown out his own thoughts. Other times he whispered apologies to no one, to everyone, to the air itself. But the silence in the house swallowed every word he said. Daniel watched both of them, day after day, while helplessness gnawed at his insides. He couldn't understand what had broken his family so suddenly. He tried asking Marlene gently, then firmly, then desperately. Each attempt ended the same way.
Tears. Silence.
Avoidance. When he approached Jordan, the boy would shrink back, eyes wide with silent guilt, like a child hiding from punishment. It wasn't normal fear, it was something deeper.
Something heavier.
Something that chilled Daniel's blood. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities.
Did Jordan hit Marlene? Did Simeone break into the house?
Did Marlene witness something traumatic? But none of these explanations fit. Not with the way Marlene flinched whenever Jordan's footsteps sounded. Not with the way Jordan refused to look at her. Not with the way they avoided existing in the same room. Something terrible had happened between them. And Daniel stood at the center, surrounded by invisible walls, unable to reach either of them. He lay awake every night, staring at the ceiling, praying for answers that never came. His heart ached with fun not only for his wife, but for his son, who seemed to be drowning in a guilt he wouldn't voice. Weeks passed.
Marlene's nausea worsened.
Her exhaustion deepened. Her body felt heavier, slower, unfamiliar. One morning, she woke up with a trembling hand pressed to her stomach, feeling a sensation she recognized from 20 years ago, an ache, a fullness, a shift inside her body that wasn't natural for her age. Her heart dropped. A chill swept through her body so violently she felt faint. No, not this. Not now, she whispered shakily, pressing her hand against her lips. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't believe it. It wasn't possible. But her instincts screamed the truth she was terrified to accept. She spent the next several days in denial, telling herself that she was imagining it, that stress could mimic symptoms, that anything, even illness, was better than the alternative. But when her body no longer allowed her to ignore the signs, she made a decision. A decision that felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. On a cool Wednesday morning, while Daniel was at work, Marlene put on a coat, grabbed her purse, and quietly stepped out of the house. She didn't tell Jordan. She didn't leave a note. She simply walked down the street with shaky steps, heading toward a small private clinic 3 blocks away. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale magazines. Marlene sat nervously in a plastic chair, gripping the strap of her purse as though it anchored her to reality. Her leg bounced uncontrollably. Her breathing was uneven. Her eyes darted around the room, afraid someone might recognize her. When her name was finally called, she stood up slowly as if her body had turned to stone. She entered the exam room. She answered questions with a trembling voice. She forced herself to remain calm. The doctor performed the exam, took her blood, asked her to wait outside again. Minutes felt like hours. Her heart thumped wildly in her chest. And then the doctor returned. His expression was gentle, but something in his eyes made her stomach drop even before he spoke. "Congratulations," he said softly.
"You're pregnant."
The world crashed. Not with sound. Not with chaos. But with a silent, devastating collapse that swallowed everything. Marlene stared blankly at him. Her throat closed. Her ears rang. Her soul felt like it had been ripped out. She whispered, "Pregnant." Her voice was barely a breath. The doctor nodded, unaware that he had just destroyed her entire world. Marlene stumbled out of the clinic, her legs weak, her vision blurry. She clung to the railing as she walked down the steps, her breath hitching with each step. The street was quiet. Cars passed. People walked dogs. Life continued. But she felt like she was sinking into quicksand. Every step home felt heavier. Every breath burned her chest. Every thought spiraled into panic. By the time she reached her front door, tears were streaming silently down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. She didn't hide them. She simply walked inside, closed the door, and leaned against it as her body slid to the floor. She wrapped her arms around her stomach. Not in protection, but in terror. And she whispered again and again, like a prayer of despair. "Please no, please not this, how am I supposed to live with this?" For the next several days, Marlene lived in a daze. She couldn't tell Daniel. She couldn't tell Jordan. She couldn't tell anyone.
The truth sat inside her like a burning coal painful poisonous, consuming her from within.
She tried to eat but couldn't swallow. She tried to sleep but woke up gasping. She tried to pretend everything was normal but broke down every time she caught her reflection. Each passing day, the reality inside her body grew stronger. And one horrifying truth repeated in her mind. This child could not be Daniel's. Not after months of emotional distance. Not after weeks without intimacy. Not with the silence that now separated them. Her stomach turned. Her skin crawled. Her heart shattered. She knew what the truth meant. She knew what night it came from. The night that destroyed everything. Late one night, when the house was dark and silent, Marlene sat on the edge of her bed gripping a small envelope she'd prepared that day. Inside were 2 samples. A strand of her own hair. And a strand she had secretly taken from Jordan's pillow. Her hands trembled violently as she sealed the envelope. Her breathing became shallow. She didn't want the truth. But she needed it. Because living in uncertainty felt worse than dying. The next morning, she mailed the envelope to a private DNA lab out of state. And then she waited. Each day dragged like a lifetime. Each minute felt like she was sinking deeper into darkness. Until finally, a letter arrived.
White envelope.
Black printed label. Her name. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. She read the words once. Then again. Then again. Her knees buckled. She fell to the floor. Her fingers clutched the paper until it wrinkled. Her vision blurred with tears. Her entire world shattered. The answer was there, cold, clinical, undeniable. The baby was Jordan's. Marlene didn't remember how long she sat on the floor clutching the DNA results. Minutes? Hours? The world outside her window continued as if nothing had changed, but inside her heart, everything had collapsed into a void so deep she wasn't sure she would ever climb out of it. The words on the page were simple, clinical, emotionless. But those words held the power to destroy her family, her marriage, her sanity, her son's future, her own future. She stared at them again and again, hoping that if she blinked enough times, the letters would rearrange themselves into something else. Something less horrifying. But paper doesn't lie.
Science doesn't lie.
Fate, however cruel, doesn't lie. The child growing inside her belonged to her son. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. Her breaths shortened into panicked gasps as if she were drowning in air. She pressed a trembling hand over her stomach, then jerked it away as though she had touched something burning hot.
No, she whispered through trembling lips.
Why would God allow this? What did I do to deserve this? Her voice cracked, but the walls gave no answer. The following nights were torture.
Marlene barely slept.
When she did drift off, she woke gasping from nightmares, some of the stormy night, some of the clinic, some of her own imagination. She avoided the kitchen entirely. She avoided looking at her own body. She avoided Jordan most of all. She started locking her door at night. Daniel noticed. He asked her gently, "Honey, is there something you're scared of?" But Marlene only shook her head, eyes downcast. The guilt of lying to Daniel consumed her, but telling the truth felt impossible, like handing him a knife and asking him to stab himself. She couldn't do it. Not yet. Jordan, meanwhile, lived inside a dim echo chamber of regret. Every time he saw his mother's face, pale, fragile, wilted, felt a sharp sting of nausea. Every time Daniel asked, "Son, did something happen?" he felt like screaming the truth just to end the torment. But he didn't. He couldn't. He was too afraid. One night, he heard a sound from his mother's room, soft at first, then louder.
A broken, muffled crying.
Crying that sounded like someone who had finally reached the end of her strength. Jordan froze. A wave of shame crashed into him so intensely that he felt his knees weaken. He pressed his palm to the wall, leaning against it for support. Every part of him wanted to turn away, to hide, to pretend he didn't hear. But something stronger than fear pulled him forward. A bond older than memory, older even than the pain. A connection that came from every moment she had cared for him, every meal she cooked, every illness she nursed him through, every time she held him as a child. He couldn't ignore her suffering. Not this time. Jordan walked down the hallway, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He raised his hand to knock but paused, his fingers hovering above the wood. The trembling in his body was so intense he almost couldn't bring himself to move. But then another sob came from inside. He gently turned the doorknob.
The door creaked open.
Marlene was on the floor beside her bed, knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with the force of her sobbing. Beside her lay the crumpled genetic test results.
Jordan's eyes widened.
His lungs seized. He knew immediately what the paper meant. His mother sensed his presence and slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen red and filled with something that shattered him completely, heartbreak mixed with terror. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marlene whispered in a broken voice.
"Jordan, it's yours, isn't it?"
The words pierced him like a knife. He felt the world tilt. His body swayed as if gravity had suddenly changed direction. His breath hitched. His vision blurred. All the guilt, fear, and torment he had been burying exploded inside him. He dropped to his knees. A single tear rolled down his cheek, then another. Soon his face was soaked. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. But he didn't need to. Marlene saw the truth in his eyes, the same truth the paper had already confirmed. She sobbed harder, covering her face again. "Why, Jordan? Why did this happen? Why did you fall so deep into that darkness? Do you know what this has done to me? To us?
To everything Ivy ever known."
He shook his head desperately. "I didn't know what I was doing," Jordan choked out, voice breaking. "I swear, Mom, I swear I didn't understand what was happening. I wasn't myself. I didn't know reality from hallucination. But that doesn't matter.
Nothing excuses it.
Nothing. He slammed his fist onto the floor, knuckles turning white. I ruined everything. I destroyed you. I ruined my life, Dad's life, Emily's life, Haley's life, and now this.
Gott, wat have I done?
He curled forward, almost collapsing. Marlene watched him, her son, broken beyond recognition, and felt an indescribable mix of emotions: pain, disgust, sorrow, and strangely a faint spark of compassion. Even through the trauma, the instinct to love her child fought its way to the surface. That hurt her even more. Jordan crawled closer, staying several feet away, afraid to approach too closely. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll never stop being sorry. But please tell me what to do.
Tell me how to fix this.
Tell me how to make your pain stop."
Marlene shook her head slowly.
"You can't fix this, Jordan. No one can.
What's done can't be undone."
Her voice broke. She took a shaky breath. But the child didn't ask for any of this. The silence in the room deepened.
Jordan's breath caught.
"Mom, are you keeping it?" Marlene closed her eyes for a long moment before answering. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I honestly don't know. Every time I touch my stomach, I feel sick. Every time I think of the future, I feel like I'm going to fall apart. But no matter what, it's innocent." A fresh wave of tears rolled down her cheeks. Jordan wiped his own tears with the back of his trembling hand. "I will take responsibility," he said with a sharp, painful determination. "I don't know what that looks like yet.
I don't know how to be strong enough.
But I swear to you I will not run from this.
I won't leave you alone."
For the first time in months, Marlene met his eyes fully. In those eyes, she saw devastation. She saw guilt. She saw fear. But she also saw something else.
A plea for redemption.
Her voice cracked as she whispered.
"Jordan, I need you to change.
For yourself. For the baby. For me. For everyone. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care how long it takes."
Jordan nodded fiercely, tears shaking.
"I will.
I promise you I will."
The sound of rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then steadily heavier.
Thunder rumbled in the distance.
The night echoed their grief. But for the first time since the tragedy began, the two of them weren't trapped in separate suffering. They were sitting in the same room, facing the same pain, acknowledging the same nightmare. It didn't heal anything. Not yet. But it was the first step toward whatever future awaited them, whether redemption or ruin. The storm outside poured down, hiding their quiet sobs as mother and son faced the darkest truth of their lives together. The morning after Jordan and Marlene faced the truth together, the Parker home felt strangely different. The heaviness was still there, thick like fog clinging to every corner, but for the first time in months, something else flickered beneath it, something fragile, hesitant, almost invisible. Hope.
A wounded, trembling kind of hope.
It was not forgiveness. Not healing. But a small step forward in a house that had forgotten what forward meant. Jordan woke earlier than he had in years. For the first time in forever, he didn't feel the urge to hide under the blankets or escape into numbness. Instead, he got up, washed his face, and stood before the mirror. He stared at his reflection for a long time. The face looking back at him was tired, hollow, and streaked with dark circles. But beneath all the damage, he saw something else, a faint spark of determination. He whispered to himself, "You're done.
No more running.
No more excuses." He threw away the small packet he kept hidden in his drawer, the last remnant of the addiction that had destroyed everything. His hands shook violently as he tossed it into the trash, but he didn't stop. He cleaned his room. He folded his clothes. He scrubbed the bathroom sink. He shaved. Small things.
Insignificant things.
But to him, they felt like victories. Because for the first time in a long time, he was doing something with intention. Not because he was told to. Not because he was scared. But because he wanted to be better. For Emily. For Hayley.
For the unborn child.
For his mother. For himself. Downstairs, Marlene sat in the living room, staring at a cup of tea she couldn't bring herself to drink. Her hands remained clasped over her stomach protectively, not out of affection, but instinct. Her mind still hadn't fully accepted what was happening inside her. Every time she felt a slight cramp, her heart jumped. Every time she thought of the future, terror surged through her veins. She felt like she was living between two extremes.
A Mutters unkonditional love.
And
a woman's deepest trauma.
She didn't hate the child. But she didn't yet know how to love it. And the guilt of that realization ate at her. Her thoughts spiraled so intensely that she didn't notice Jordan quietly approaching the doorway. "Mom," he said softly. She looked up, startled but not recoiling the way she once did. Jordan swallowed. His voice trembled.
"Can he sit with you?"
Marlene hesitated, then nodded slowly. He sat on the adjacent couch, keeping a respectful distance. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't painful silence, more like fragile peace. Jordan finally spoke. "Mom, I'm going to change. I know words don't mean much right now. But I'm done with everything that dragged me down." Marlene looked at his face carefully, almost searching for lies. But all she saw was exhaustion layered with sincerity. She didn't speak. But she didn't look away either. For Jordan, that was enough. At lunchtime, the front door opened and Daniel stepped in, carrying a bag of groceries. He paused at the sight before him, Marlene sitting quietly, Jordan sitting near her, and neither of them flinching or avoiding each other. For a moment, Daniel felt relief. Maybe things were finally getting better. But the tension in the air was still unmistakable. Something had shifted, yes, but the shadow of whatever happened still clung tightly to his wife and son. Daniel set the groceries down and approached slowly. "Everything okay?" he asked, voice gentle but wary.
Jordan and Marlene exchanged a brief glancione loaded with secrets and pain. Marlene forced a small smile.
"I'm doing better today."
Daniel knelt beside her.
"That's good," he said softly, placing a hand on her knee. She stiffened, almost imperceptibly, but he noticed. His chest tightened. He didn't show it on his face, but inside, a storm brewed. What had happened to his wife? What had made her so afraid? And why did she act this way only around Jordan? That afternoon, Jordan walked to Emily's apartment. His steps were slow, heavy with anxiety. He practiced what he would say several times, but every attempt sounded hollow. He didn't know how to ask for forgiveness when he knew he didn't deserve it. Emily opened the door, holding their daughter Hayley. She looked surprised to see him, surprised and cautious.
"Jordan?
What are you doing here?" Hayley reached her small hands toward him, giggling softly. The sound punched a hole through his heart. He knelt and kissed her cheek. Then he looked up at Emily, his voice trembling. "I messed up. I messed up so badly I don't even recognize myself anymore. But I want to fix things. I want to be a better father.
A better partner.
A better man." Emily didn't respond right away. She studied his face, his exhausted eyes, his cracking voice, the sincerity that trembled beneath all the guilt. She spoke quietly. "You've said things like this before, Jordan." "I know," he said. "And I ruined everything anyway. But I'm not here to make promises I can't keep.
I'm here because I want to earn back your trust slowly.
Safely. Respectfully. Even if it takes years. Emily stood silent for a long moment. Then in a voice barely above a whisper she replied. Okay. One chance. But you have to prove it. Jordan nodded, tears in his eyes. I will. I swear. In the days that followed, Jordan threw himself into change. He found work with a construction crew honest, tiring labor that left him exhausted but grounded. He avoided old friends. He avoided bars. He avoided every temptation that had once ruled him. He spent evenings helping Marlene cleaning, cooking, repairing small things around the house that Daniel always handled before. At first, Marlene accepted the help stiffly. Then cautiously. Then gradually with a touch of warmth. One evening, Jordan brought her a bowl of soup he'd made himself. It wasn't perfect, too salty, slightly overcooked, but when he placed it gently on the table in front of her, she felt a crack in her defenses. She picked up the spoon. Tasted it. Looked at him. It's good, she said softly. Jordan smiled for the first time in months. Not a big smile. But a real one. He left the room quickly, wiping his eyes in the hallway. That night, Marlene touched her stomach again, not with fear, but with a tiny seed of acceptance.
Not forgiveness.
Not love. But the beginning of a possibility. Late that night, while the house slept, Marlene stood by the window watching streetlights flicker through the darkness. The faint glow reflected off her tear-streaked face. Jordan approached slowly from behind. Mom, he whispered. She didn't turn, but she didn't step away. He stepped closer, keeping his distance but speaking honestly.
Are you keeping the baby?
Marlene took a deep, trembling breath. I don't know, she whispered. Every part of this terrifies me. But a child is a child.
Innocent.
And I can't bring myself to hate something that isn't at fault. Her voice shook.
I don't know if I'm strong enough.
I don't know who I'll become. I don't know what Daniel will do. But I'm trying to find a part of myself that can accept this. Jordan's eyes filled with tears.
Mom, warte für you decide, I'll stand with you.
This time, I won't run. She finally turned to look at him. For the first time since the tragedy, Marlene saw not the boy who hurt her, but the broken young man desperately trying to rebuild what he destroyed. For the first time, she believed he meant every word. The next morning, Marlene woke and felt something unfamiliar in her chest, not happiness, not relief, but a softer, weaker emotion. Strength.
A teeny flicker of it.
A small patch of solid ground in the middle of her emotional quicksand. She got out of bed slowly and walked downstairs. Jordan was already in the kitchen, packing a lunch for work. He looked up, startled.
Good morning, Mom.
Marlene nodded. Good morning. Her voice was steadier.
Hier Posture Firma.
Jordan smiled slightly. And in that quiet kitchen in Cleveland, with sunlight beginning to seep through the blinds, something impossible happened. Peace, fragile, wounded, tentative, began to return. Not because anything was fixed. Not because pain had faded. But because both mother and son were choosing to walk toward a future they didn't yet understand. Together. Months passed in the Parker household, each one slowly reshaping the contours of their fractured lives. What had once been a place of suffocating silence was gradually transforming not into the cheerful home it used to be, but into something new. Something built on pain, truth, and fragile resilience. The wounds were still there, deep and hard to touch. But so were the steps toward healing. Marlene's pregnancy progressed, and as her stomach grew, so did her complicated emotions. At first, she couldn't bear to look at herself in the mirror. She saw not the life blooming inside her, but the tragedy that placed it there. But over time, something unexpected happened. When she felt the baby flutter for the first time, just a faint ticklight caused her throat to tighten with tears. Not tears of fear, but something gentler.
Something almost tender.
She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering shakily, "You didn't ask for any of this. And I won't punish you for it." The more the child grew, the more her fear softened, just enough to make space for acceptance. Not complete acceptance, but a path toward it. She started eating better.
Sleeping more.
Breathing easier. Every day was still a battle, but she fought it. And that mattered. Jordan transformed in ways no one expected. The construction job became his anchor. The long hours under the sun, lifting heavy beams, breathing dust and cold air, it grounded him, tore away the fog that had ruled his mind for so long. His body grew leaner, stronger. His eyes clearer.
He came home early every evening, leaving no room for old temptations.
He helped Marlene with house chores. He checked on her quietly, never crossing boundaries she wasn't ready for. He called Emily and Haley every weekend, asking to see them, and sometimes Emily allowed it. One evening, after Jordan spent hours fixing her sink, Emily said softly,
"Haley misses you."
"And you're doing good, Jordan. I see that." He blinked, caught off guard by the softness in her voice. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm trying."
"For all of us."
She smiled faintly. "And I can tell." It was only a sliver of hope, but slivers can grow.
Daniel was the only one still living in the dark.
He saw Marlene's growing belly and believed it to be his own child. A miracle, perhaps, though unexpected. He grew more protective of her than ever. He cooked dinner when she felt weak. He drove her to prenatal checkups, believing it was routine. He took extra jobs to save money for a new crib, repainting the small guest room on the second floor in soothing green tones. But beneath his efforts, worry still simmered. He noticed the uneasy glances between Marlene and Jordan. He sensed the heaviness that haunted the edges of their interactions. He knew something monumental had happened, something he still wasn't allowed to understand. Sometimes he'd wake up at night, staring at the ceiling with fear tightening his chest, whispering,
"God, please whatever happened, don't let it destroy my family."
He didn't know he was praying for something already broken. But he was also praying for something being rebuilt. The night Marlene went into labor, rain poured over Cleveland as if the sky itself felt the weight of everything that led to this moment. Daniel rushed her to the hospital, hands shaking as he held her arm. Jordan followed in his old truck, heart pounding with a mixture of fear, guilt, dread, and hope all at once. Hours passed. Hospital hallways echoed with distant footsteps and murmured conversations. Daniel paced. Jordan sat with his head in his hands. When the nurses finally opened the door and called them in, Jordan froze. His legs wouldn't move. Daniel stepped forward, but Marlene reached out, weak but determined.
"Jordan," she whispered.
Daniel stopped mid-step, confused. Jordan looked up slowly. Marlene held out her hand. "Come here." Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were clear. He stood up, heart hammering, and walked to her bedside. Beside her lay a tiny newborn wrapped in a soft white blanket.
"A small, quiet es gibt the babysoft, fragile, alive." Marlene guided Jordan's hand toward the child. His fingers touched the blanket hesitant, trembling.
The moment his hand brushed the baby's cheek, his breath caught. The world around him disappeared.
The noise faded.
Everything, all its tragedy and pain, went silent. The baby opened her eyes.
Brecht.
Clear.
Innocent.
Jordan broke. Tears streamed down his face, heavier than any he had ever cried.
Marlene whispered.
Whatever happened, whatever pain exists, this child is not to blame. She deserves love. She deserves peace. And you must give her the chance to have both. Jordan nodded, sobbing quietly. I will, Mom.
I swear on my life I will.
Daniel watched the scene, confused but overwhelmed by emotion, sensing something profound happening even if he didn't understand it.
When Marlene and the baby came home, everything changed. The house felt warmer.
Not healed. Healing is slow. But alive again. Daniel adored the baby immediately, unaware of the truth, believing their family had been given a second blessing late in life. He often whispered, "Thank God for this miracle." Jordan would turn away when he heard that pain twisting inside him, but also gratitude. Because Daniel's love for the child was pure. And pure love was something this child desperately needed. Jordan helped with everything.
Late night feedings.
Changing diapers.
Rocking the baby to sleep when Marlene's strengt faltert.
Sometimes he cried quietly, holding her, whispering apologies she would never understand but he needed to say. Marlene watched him from the doorway sometimes. Her heart ached. But it also softened. Jordan wasn't trying to erase the past. He was trying to build a future that wasn't haunted by it. And that mattered. More than he knew. Months later, a warm spring morning bathed the house in gold sunlight. Marlene sat on the couch, newborn daughter nestled against her shoulder. Jordan sat on the floor nearby, folding laundry. Daniel stepped into the room carrying coffee for everyone. It wasn't a perfect scene. Pain lived here. Secrets lived here. Ghosts lived here. But so did effort.
Love.
Redemption.
Courage. And the slow rebuilding of trust.
The Parker home had changed forever. It would never be what it once was. But it had become something else. Something shaped by tragedy. Yet stitched together by choice. A family not healed. But healing. A family not whole. But holding on.
A family moving forward.
One breath. One apology.
One act of love at a time.
And sometimes, that is enough.